how can we start a discussion about the topic that we're talking about today? I guess a good way to get there is actually see how the Jan 25 movement went from revolution till the current election situation, parliamentary and presidential elections. And then from there, actually examine the situation and then see what the future entails to everything. Jan 25, the revolution, Egyptian revolution, actually, in hindsight, over the past year and a half, given how turbulent it has been and how bloody it has been, comparatively, of course, not so much, to Syria and Libya, but to the Egyptian people, it has been very distressing. One of its main benefits has been its ability to actually remove the scabs of, the wound that is the Egyptian state corruption, which we have come to realize more and more and more and more that it's actually much bigger and much more entrenched than anyone has ever thought possible or imagined. And the cool thing about it is that the push against it actually is forcing a lot of the issues out to the point in which that, I don't know, someone was talking to me today, was comparing it to opening the lid of a sewer. Basically all the cockroaches are coming out right now. And it's a good thing because that's the only way to clean out the sewers, kill all the cockroaches, bring them all out. The drawbacks have been in terms of the actual revolutionary movements. Well, we've heard them all before. That they haven't gotten a leader, that they've been idealistic, etc., etc. In regards to the concept of a leader, we'll talk about this later, but in terms of idealism, I think the main problem that faced many of the revolutionaries has been what I like to call the Mao versus Napoleon strategy. Napoleon, when he went to war, basically, he always focused not on general strategy, but on getting as many troops as possible, going straight ahead with the enemy, and not really caring whether or not his wars or his battles were affecting public opinion back home. Didn't care about public opinion back home. Mao, on the other hand, operated on the principle of attack when you're strong, withdraw when you're weak, always make sure that public opinion is with you, no matter what. Napoleon ended up being exiled out of the country. Mao ended up acquiring China. So, unfortunately, we're not Maoists. Unfortunately, we've been following Napoleon footsteps. So, in many ways, and that actually comes from the concept of how idealistic actually a majority of the revolutionaries have been, which a lot of people have come to me and said it was a drawback. And personally speaking, given the amount of corrupt people and corruption that actually exists in Egypt, I'm like, listen, man, I'll take that kind of evil, the idealistic evil, any day over the other kind. But the other problem has been that they have been very emotional. And it's very hard not to be emotional. It's very hard not to think with your head, not think with your heart instead of your head, when many of your friends end up dying or being abducted or losing an eye or an arm, or both eyes actually happen in some cases. So, but on the other hand, it's actually been very interesting because even though the movement had very little brain and a lot of heart, that didn't seem to actually make the majority of the public hate it. And that has actually been proven by the results of the elections. But we'll get to that when we talk about it. I think in order for us to give a perspective on what happened in the elections, we have to start with the parliamentary election results first. As everyone here probably knows, the parliamentary elections ended up with the Islamists divided between Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis getting over 70% of the parliament seats. The reason for which we like to always say that when we went out to the street, we said bread, freedom, and social justice. The leftists went and talked to people about social justice, and the liberals went and talked to people about freedom, and the Islamists went around and gave people bread. And apparently that was the strategy to win over that one. And the numbers, which I believe are very important to keep note of, the Muslim Brotherhood ended up getting 12 million votes, and the Salafis ended up getting 7 million votes. Now, moving on forward, presidential election starts, which has been very much kind of like watching an episode of Survivor. An entire season, actually, in like a month. Because when it first started, we had a month in which everybody was submitting their papers. And what got known as the Big Three submitted their papers. The Big Three were ex-Mubarak number 2 Omar Suleiman, Muslim Brotherhood financiers and man behind the curtain Kharat al-Shatir, and completely insane Qaddafi-like character that is Hazm Salah Abu Ismail, Salafi leader. He is. It's great. He claims to will be able to in 1 month to get to Egypt $200 trillion, and people believe him. But whatever. So, funny enough, Kharat al-Shatir they all ended up out of this due to the fantastic Egyptian bureaucracy and its ability to completely change the course of a country by basically generating papers. So Omar Suleiman ended up being out of the race because apparently, even though he collected more than letters of agencies he had to collect, he ended up missing 22 letters of agency in one governorate, and that was just enough for him to be kicked out. So he was gone. And then you've had Kharat al-Shatir, and even though he had a pardon, apparently the pardon came out after the date of submitting himself to the electoral committee. Therefore, it was illegal for him to actually run, so he was out. And Hazm Salah Abu Ismail, Mr. Arab World, we're going to stand against America and Israel and all the evil Western powers. Apparently, his mom was an American, so he was out. And that left, the other 5 people. There's actually 13, but really, who cares about the other 7? They really don't care about them. Other 8. And the other 5 are, as everyone knows, or don't know, I guess I'm gonna tell anyway. Mohamed Morsi, which was the alternative candidate for the Muslim Brotherhood. They literally went out with 2 candidates, and he was the backup candidate, which really speaks a lot for their confidence in him and ability to sell them to the people. His problem has been he has been called the spare tire of the Muslim Brotherhood the entire elections. Hasn't really been good for him. And then we have Ahmed Shafiq, who was the last prime minister of Hosni Mubarak, who is, I think, old, aging, drunk, and military, which is a very interesting character to choose, especially with a Muslim Brotherhood-controlled parliament. The negotiations are going to be fun. And then you have, who are the other 3? Yes, of course. Abdul Menam Hamdin Sabbahi, Nasserite leftist, who really is the son of the 1952 revolution. Really, like his views on foreign policy and economics are of the Nasserite era. But on the other hand, he does share the ideas about social freedoms and rights that most of us do, and he's very much for the civil state. So he ended up being the revolutionary choice. And then you have Abdel Menam Abul Futuh, who was claiming to be a centrist, not being part of the Muslim Brotherhood, despite being in the Muslim Brotherhood for over 30 years or 40 years, ever since he was young. Didn't claim to be an Islamist, even though he was backed by the Salafi party of Noor. And then we have Amr Moussa, who claimed to be a revolutionary and not part of the Mubarak regime, despite being Mubarak's foreign minister for 10 years and Mubarak's choice for Secretary General of the Arab world for another 10 years. And the cool thing that ended up happening is actually 2 things. Number 1, Egypt managed to actually change history again, or actually get into history by being the country that has killed all ideology. And by that I mean we had people voting for candidates not based upon their ideological views or inclination, even a program, but basically based on their feelings of the character of the candidate. So we've had atheists, socialists, and communists supporting Abdel Menam Abul Futuh, a Muslim Brotherhood, ex-Muslim Brotherhood, Salafi-backed guy. We've had capitalist liberals supporting Hamdin Sabbahi, a guy who was actually running for liquidating all of their assets. And everybody just basically walked away from candidates that did not seem to be clear. Apparently, Amr Moussa and Abul Futuh were considered the top contenders. They were the people who went on the televised debate. They are supposed to be the front runners. And they are the front runners because they were supposed to represent the center. There is a problem. There is no center after a revolution. After a revolution, there is no room for center. You cannot just create a center. A center, in order for it to be created, there has to be equal forces of opposite powers on both extremes that actually create the balance that provides a center. Instead, they tried to synthetically create one. And Egyptians were not looking for a center after the revolution. They were looking for black or white. End of story. Tell us what do you stand for, what are you actually going to do. So Amr Moussa ended up coming off the fifth because he couldn't really sell himself to a single demographic. Nobody could really trust him to be their guy. The ex-regime people did not trust him enough to be ex-regime. The revolutionaries looked at him as ex-regime. The secularists thought that he was too much of a politician, that he would compromise with the Muslim Brotherhood, so they didn't vote for him. Abu al-Futuh the same way. The people who wanted to vote for him in the revolutionaries thought he was too much in the Muslim Brotherhood. The Islamists thought that he was too much of a liberal, and he ended up going out of the race as well. So what we end up having is the big three of Mohammed Morsi, firmly Muslim Brotherhood, Ahmed Shafiq, firmly old NDP ex-regime, and Hamdin Sabbahi, firmly revolutionaries / Bladeh supporters / whatever. So, which was actually kind of refreshing because in the final math, it hurt us, the revolutionaries, actually, because our votes end up being divided between Hamdin, Abu al-Futuh, and Amr Moussa. But it also gave us, for the first time, an actual accurate representation of how the vote in Egypt is. And the vote in Egypt showed two things. Number one, the claim by the ex-regime supporters that they were the silent majority proved that there were not more than 5.2 million Egyptians in a country of 90 million. Because the silent majority always supported Shafiq. And the silent majority basically was the 3 million candidates from the NDP and one of their friends. And the same thing for the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood had won 12 million votes, remember? Now they were running at 5.7 million, 6 months after the parliamentary elections. They actually lost an average of 1 million votes per month since the parliamentary elections. The Salafis, who had won 7 million votes, could not get half of those votes for Abdul Abu al-Futuh, because Abu al-Futuh ended up getting about 1.5 million votes from the revolutionary votes, and they end up getting 2 million Salafi votes out of 7. So that in itself showed an interesting example of the actual size of political Islam in one aspect, and it's actually more of the percentage everybody expected it to be, which is around 25-30%. Secondly, it showcased that after a year and a half, the revolutionaries, actually their ideals, or at least the people that they supported, they managed to get comparatively 51% of the vote. While the Muslim Brotherhood, after spending 80 years being in Egypt, only could get 24.8% of the vote, and the ex-regime, despite having all of the government agencies still under their control, only managed to get 24.2% of the vote. So in that sense, the future is ours, and that's a fantastic thing. And the other one, it actually shows that the myth of political Islam being the dominant force in politics in our region over the next how many years that everybody likes to say here is actually quite dead. And we'll get into that in a minute as well. But what ended up having is that we have a result between Shafiq versus Morsi, which is the result between the ex-regime and the Muslim Brotherhood candidate. Now, this is an impossible choice to make. And it's an impossible choice to make for the specific reasons. While everybody does not want to vote Shafiq at all, because that would be bringing back the regime, we are very fearful of the kind of regime that the Muslim Brotherhood would actually install. And it's not because we're Islamophobic or afraid of Sharia law, even though I personally am, but mainly because the Muslim Brotherhood is a tribe. They have actually managed to tribalize themselves. They all intermarry with each other. We're having a situation in which the upper house, the speaker of the upper house of parliament in Egypt is actually the brother-in-law, who's Muslim Brotherhood, the brother-in-law of the speaker of the lower house of parliament in Egypt, who's also Muslim Brotherhood, and the son of the lower house of parliament in Egypt is married to the daughter of Mohammed Morsi, the would-be president of Egypt. So instead of having checks and balances, we'll have dinner conversations in one of their houses, which is not exactly the kind of situation you want, in a government that actually keeps check on the president. So in that sense, we were having a fun time in that, because you can't really decide what we're going to do. especially that the revolutionary votes are having there's a serious discussion happening over this. At first, there are some people who tried to get the revolutionaries to vote for the Muslim Brotherhood. And so the revolutionaries said, okay, fine, we're going to actually play politics. So we're actually going to go and talk with the Muslim Brotherhood and try to reach a compromise. And the Muslim Brotherhood, arrogant and stupid as always, thank God, have actually went and insulted the revolutionaries day after day after day after day, telling them that there is no deal, that actually if you ask us for a deal, that would be blackmail, and you just have to vote for Morsi. So it has come to the point in which I actually know a bunch of revolutionaries who are going to vote for Shafiq, specifically because they believe that voting for Shafiq or voting for Morsi would be voting for oppression and fascism. But in the idea of Shafiq, it would be, since the revolutionaries are screwed anyway, in his opinion, we might as well take the Muslim Brotherhood down with us. So it's really interesting watching the development of the political culture in Egypt, especially with the idea of revenge voting. And also of the idea that no matter who the president is going to be, he's going to have 75% of the country in opposition to him before he even starts or even says anything. So that's a very interesting idea. I know it's not that interesting in countries that have lots of democracy, but a country like ours, whoa, this is new. The other thing that's actually a fantastic thing is this is actually putting onto the fore a really serious discussion that the revolutionaries need to have right now, which is leaders, man. We need leaders, apparently. Why don't we have leaders? I had a French journalist once ask me that question. They're like, wouldn't you, if you had a leader from the beginning, wouldn't that have been different? And I'm like, yeah, okay, but if you had a leader from the beginning, you've had to have someone that the Muslim Brotherhood, the Salafis, the centrists, the liberals, the socialists, the anarchists, the communists all agree on. And if you can find me this person, I would have told you who the next president of Egypt would have been. That person is imaginary. Not to mention, there is a serious problem in the world. There is a problem in leaders itself. There is a leadership crisis. We do not relate to the people who are claiming to represent us anymore, because unlike them, we are not robots. We no longer have the ability to just say the right thing all the time, to watch out what we do in our lives all the time, to always try to position our views in such a way that not offend anyone. I think in the next evolution of politics, we're about to see more flawed political leaders, but actually also more human and more relatable for that reason. So in our case, we chose our symbols to be our leaders. And that's a big mistake, because you could have a symbol and that symbol could represent you, but is not exactly the person that you need to actually lay out the strategy for you. And the majority of our symbols are people who have been fighting the fight, but not exactly strategists. So right now, we're going into another recalibration mode, working out the kinks of that, because in order for us to actually prepare ourselves for the challenge of taking over the country in the near future, within 4 or 8 years, it's inevitable, it's going to happen. We cannot be jokers about this. If we are serious, we're actually going to have to present people who are serious, who are going to be able to do the work, because there's a lot of work to be done. Now, I've been asked, what will I do on election day? And I inform people that actually I intend to sit at home, open TV, have a kind of a party, have champagne, and eat popcorn, even though I fully intend to invalidate the vote. Because I'm going to celebrate the fact that whoever the next president is going to be, it's not going to be a Mubarak or a kind of Mubarak. And for someone who has been in the opposition and going through demonstrations when it was 50 people in 2005, Lali here, remember, she was there with us while we're getting beaten up by 5,000 police officers. This is new. This would have been impossible if you told me this would be the case 2 years ago. But when it comes to the future, we're dealing with a bunch of trends that we're seeing now. One of them is that corruption in the government is now more apparent and visible to everyone, more than any time before. Just today, the head of the Judges Club, his name is Zanad, went on and he was attacking the people who criticized the general prosecutor and the judge for the judgment that went out against Mubarak and his sons that just came out a few days ago. And it was a fantastic rant, because the guy went for half an hour basically saying things like, and that parliament, who do they think they are to criticize us? If we had known that they would look like this, we wouldn't have allowed them to win in the parliamentary elections when we were supervising. And those people who are talking about how we hire our own sons as judges, if they think, don't they understand this is a holy mission? Of course, we're always going to hire our sons. And any person who calls us corrupt will just call them a hater and a critic for no reason. And so on and so on and so on and so on. The guy literally basically outlined every single, this man actually admitted to every single charge we've been accusing of, which is not being independent when it actually comes to the elections, manipulating elections results, not respecting rule of law, nepotism, you name it. It's on the table. And the people are reacting to it. Suddenly now, and this is another step in the actual fight, because this thing is going to continue on for a while. The second thing is that there is an actual decline in the prospect of future of political Islam, as I have stated. The big problem that the majority of population is having, who have been anti the old regime, they are so much anti the Muslim Brotherhood now, it's ridiculous. There is nowhere that you go in which people tell you that they will vote for Shafiq because they hate the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, why? Because they actually went into parliament, and instead of actually fixing, the problems that people were facing, they talked about lowering the marriage age to 12 years old when it comes to girls, and possibly enacting haraba law, sharia law, and very stupid things that should not have been discussed. And any person with a brain would have said that the Muslim Brotherhood would not do this in the first year. But having the Salafis in the parliament apparently got them to have to compete on who is more Islamist, to both of their detriment. On the other hand, the decline in the Islamists in the Salafi votes showcased the fraction that we were anticipating from the beginning starting to happen. Because Salafis in general are not into politics. Salafis do not believe in democracy. They believe in being good Muslims and going to home and pray, and then God will bring us a good leader if we're good enough Muslims. The divine election. Okay, that's what's going to happen. So over the bunch of months, they have seen the Salafis support Abu Mina al-Futuh, who for them is basically a secularist, if not an infidel, and they very much felt disgusted with their political leadership. So many of them did not go and vote. And many of them seem to have serious issues with the party right now. So the Salafis are actually moving away from the political arena. The Muslim Brotherhood are facing themselves only there within their actual stronghold of 5 million votes that they can possibly get every single time, which means in a country with 53 million votes that they are bound to get 10 to 15% in every coming election after that. So the Indonesia situation, when they had 80% and went back to 10% the next election, very much the next parliamentary election will happen. And it might be sooner than we all expect, because they're looking into the legitimacy of the parliamentary elections, and a verdict is coming out on the 14th of June. So might end up disbanding parliament and having another election before the end of the year, which should be interesting when it comes to the constitution. 3, there is an actual shift inside the Egyptian population when it comes, to voting. Remember when I said, we talked about freedom, they talked about social justice, and the Islamists give people bread? Well, it didn't work out this time. People this time actually refused to be bribed. And in a country like Egypt, in which people are very hungry and very poor, this is huge. This is very strange. This is a very positive development. People refuse to actually bribe the Muslim Brotherhood to vote for them, which is costing the Muslim Brotherhood, because they spent hundreds of millions and they got nowhere. They didn't get any more votes than they actually anticipated. And finally, the street movements. What are they supposed to do? Well, so far there has been a movement to stop actually moving in the street and actually work on the street. And by working on the street, meaning working inside the neighborhoods, working inside the streets that people live in, and actually winning their trust, instead of actually just always claiming to represent them and always moving around them and stopping them from actually working all the time. The guys from 6th of April are working on municipal elections. I've been creating people through the party that I ran with in parliament all over the nation for that same specific reasons. I think what we're about to see is lots of leaders being created on a very fundamental small municipal level, and then building up for that, which is the way it should have been happening from the beginning if we didn't get sucked in a political struggle from day one for our survival. So I know right now it's a very critical time. Lots of people are saying, did the Egyptian revolution really achieve its goals? It's been a year and a half. Give us some time, please. Okay? And the economy is not really helping. But the one thing you just need to be sure of is no matter how messy things are happening, over the next year, which I bet will be messy and will be bloody, there is really no turning back anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you.